Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Kabbala of Self-Change. And we're now going to begin our second session of discussing the power of tefillah, of prayer, based upon the principles of Kabbalah, particularly as interpreted by Rav Kook. And let's just do a quick review of what we did last week. Last week, we talked about something which is, I was about to say pretty heavy, but I think that's sort of an understatement. It's dealing with, on a certain level, the most ultimate issue, and that is formulated in the following way. Perhaps one could say that the great question which philosophers of religion might ask is, does God exist? How can I prove God's existence philosophically or in some other way? Kabbalists have a completely different problem. Their problem is, how do I know that I exist? Right? That God exists, of course. It's axiomatic. But that creates a very serious problem with regards to any existence which seems to be apart from God. Because if God exists, and if we imagine God as being an utter perfection in every possible sense of that word, an utter unity in every sense of that word unity, then if I say that this chair is not God, so that is a kind of impingement upon God's perfect unity, perfect oneness, perfect everythingness. This is not God. Where'd that chair come from? So this is really one of the central issues that Kabbalah deals with, and that is the process of creation. And it just keeps on coming up again and again and again. The class that some of you come to early in the morning, California time, that's looking very deeply into the notion of, seems to have nothing to do with the topic, and that is how to love another person. But in fact, we've been tracing this issue down to having a proper understanding of the oneness of God. And we've been talking about the difference between God's name Elohim and God's name Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, those two different names of God, Havaya and Elohim. And it's the same exact issue there. What's the relationship between God in his perfect essence and creation? Where'd that happen? How'd that kind of flow into being? Now, there's no real answer in the sense that any of us in this room, except for Larry Weinstein, could possibly fully understand. But the direction that Kabbalah points to, which is alluded to in Talmudic literature as well, is this notion, as we pointed out last week, that God is the place of the world. That's why God is called in Hebrew Hamakom, the place. And we gave as an analogy, or as a metaphor perhaps, idea of a mental image in the mind of a thinker. So when we have an image in our own imagination, like if we're imagining a flower, I think we did that last week. We all imagined a flower in our mind's eye. So we created a new reality, a mental image. It's as real as any mental image, right? It's the reality of a mental image. And that mental image, we didn't gain any weight when we thought about it. Even if I were to imagine something really heavy in mind, wouldn't gain any weight. And if I stopped thinking about it, I wouldn't lose any weight. And it's not really adding anything new to me, right? It's completely integrated into my own being and wholly dependent upon me. As soon as I start thinking about something more significant, like dermatology, so immediately the image just disappears. So we, I believe, have used the term contingent existence or contingent reality and absolute reality. Only God is the absolute reality, because only God has a reality which is not dependent upon some other prior reality or bigger reality to bring it into being, bring God into being. Everything else that exists, whether it's the computer or the table or a potato chip, is a contingent reality. Its reality is contingent, dependent upon some other force. That's how Kabbala understands it, to bring it into being. And it's kind of like, just to use the metaphor of thinking an image into existence in your mind. It only exists when you are actively thinking it into existence.
But your image only exists for you and
Right.
nothing else.
Right. So that's why
There's no, I can't tell you, I can't see what your image of a flower is. I can't.
I actually thought you could.
Not yet. Not yet.
So now it's an important question you're asking, and my answer is, you're about to hear my speech. I'll try to make this one brief, and that is, whenever you give a mashal, right, an analogy, it's in order to be able to say, I want to communicate some specific aspect of something using an analogy which is effective with regards to that specific aspect which I'm trying to communicate. In this case, the idea of dependent reality or contingent reality versus independent or absolute reality. But always, it's the very nature of things. When you're giving a mashal, right, you're giving an analogy, the analogy is never wholly analogous to the thing that you're trying to describe, because it's an analogy, right? So you're 100% right that in many ways, the mental image in the mind of the thinker is not analogous to the way we understand the existence of this contingent reality, dependent reality within God. So you're absolutely right in many ways, but it is an effective way of imagining the notion of something which has a reality to it, but it's a reality which is not absolute. It's a reality which depends upon being realityed into existence. I just made a verb out of that, reality into existence at every moment. And of course, this is the doctrine of that Hashem is mechadesh b'tuvo b'chol yom ma'aseh breshit, that God brings into being in every single moment being, which if you don't approach things from sort of a mystical point of view, then it's really hard to understand what that means on any kind of genuine level. You can understand it on some kind of poetic level. You know, nature is always being refreshed, and it's the winter and it's the summer and it's the spring, and the flowers come and the flowers go, and in that sense of a kind. But according to this doctrine that we're discussing here, we talk about the doctrine of ongoing creation. It takes on a literally true meaning, that creation is being engendered into existence at every single moment. Okay, now, here is the rub. L'chaim first. I already made the bracha, so I don't want anybody to suspect that I wouldn't make the blessing before having a cup of coffee. I have a witness. Okay. But I can make a l'chaim. Here's the rub. What we just said is a fundamental Kabbalistic idea, but it explains something really, really important. If all of existence is being engendered into existence at every single moment, being brought into existence at every single moment, there is a kind of yearning. That's a very anthropomorphic term, but it's useful. A kind of yearning in all of existence to realize the true nature of existence. So let me give you an analogy. Now, for this, you're going to have to really use your imagination. I have some whiskey over there. Will that help? You have to think about it.
No,
it won't help. Okay. So, for imagination, only a little shot of whiskey can help. In any case, imagine the following, and someone even told me that someone wrote a book with this kind of theme. Imagine that I'm thinking in my mind's eye, like a Pinocchio. In my imagination, I'm going to create a Pinocchio. This Pinocchio has so much chutzpah, so much gall, that it decides that it's not a figment of my imagination. It's not a mental image internal to my imagination. It's a wholly independent, autonomous, absolute reality. So that Pinocchio needs therapy. And it's obviously living a delusional life. Okay, now, for us, and you'll see in a few minutes, it's actually for the whole world. But let's just talk about human beings for a second. You see, when we try to live that delusion as if, hey, I'm really something. Look at this. Whoa, flesh. I'm a something. My existence is not dependent upon anything cosmic, right? Mystical. Hey, you know why I exist right now? Because I existed a minute ago too. I'm just continuing to exist because I came into being a few decades ago. Okay, a bunch of decades ago. And I've existed ever since then. There's nothing about me that's being engendered into being at every single second. Now, I'm not telling you the truth right now. I'm talking about, in fact, how it's very easy to experience our lives, our being. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't say that it's very easy. I would say that's the default. The default experience of our existence is to think that we're really something. And I don't mean that in the kind of metaphorical sense of I'm really something, even though feeling like really something is related to feeling really something.
If you're unique, you're unique. You exist as a matter of fact. And that, the circumstances of your existence are not preordained, not determined, may in some way have been determined by past events, but not in,
Well, I think what you're pointing out
is level it doesn't.
Right. I think what you're pointing out is that there are many good reasons to actually have a very rational.
It's a logical, rational.
You're 100% right. Thank you for making my point. That's exactly my point. For any normal, rational person, before they went to the Madonna school of Kabbala, right, walked around thinking that they're something, right? The problem is that from a Kabbalistic point of view, it's not true. Now, thinking something not true doesn't necessarily cost you anything, depending on what we're talking about. But in this particular case, according to Kabbalah, the cost of feeling that we're something is profound, because thinking we're an independent existence means that we have a consciousness of being ripped away from the true source of our being. Since the true source of our being is just for the purposes of this discussion, again, it's just an analogy, the divine mind, right? We're this internal existence within the divine mind. Again, I'm just using that as a limited analogy just to get the sense of how this dependent existence. So to somehow not appreciate that attachment to source is in fact to experience on a very deep, subtle, but pervasive level a horrible sense of alienation from our own source, alienation from the root of our own being. You know what it sort of evokes in my mind, even though, again, this is an analogy, this is not the real thing. In there's been a lot of research, kind of tragic research, that's been done about issues of they call it attachment. Attachment. What's attachment? A baby is born. Where does a baby come from? What's it been doing for the previous 9 months? It's been hanging out in Club Med, of the womb. Okay, it is very, 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 very attached to its source. What happens? Birth is actually, according to this theory, a kind of psychological crisis for the infant, because it's being ripped away from this kind of nurturing, not even kind of, literally, this environment that it had for 9 months of complete protection, of constant nurturing, literally in terms of nourishment, etc. All the needs are taken care of by being, it's actually not a bad analogy, subsumed within the womb of the mother.
But that assumes that the infant has consciousness in utero.
So you don't have to go so far, actually. We do, because consciousness, if you assume consciousness in the sense of explicit self-awareness, like I can have a conversation about what I'm experiencing right now. That's so obviously, well, I don't know about obvious, maybe some people disagree, but I think most people in this room, except for Mo, would agree that babies probably don't have that consciousness, but he did in utero. He was the most amazing fetus. It was incredible. His mother told me. But what you could suggest is on a deep psychic level, there's some kind of psychic emotional level, so which is precognitive. It's not like the baby thinks about it, but there's a kind, put it this way, you could put it in terms of security. The baby has this sense of being very secure in the fetus of the mother. So what happens? The baby's born. So it's ripped out from this sense of security, of nourishment, attachment. Larry has this look on his face like he wants to get back in and have that experience of being protected and nourished. And it is kind of an inviting thing. And that's not a joke, because this theory does suggest, and this is in terms of development, psychological development, that we, in a certain sense, are trying to return to the womb. We want to recreate that sense of security. And that's why many cultures there's a very strong sense of attachment between the infant and the mother. In a lot of cultures, third world cultures, the baby is actually put into a pouch kind of thing, or actually kangaroos. That's a different story though. But they're actually it's actually part of the womb. They're actually haven't finished their development inside the womb. But in any case, though it's a similar idea. But in any case, so there's this kind of attachment, parenting, this bond. And unfortunately, there have been studies of what happens to children who, for one reason or another, don't have mothers, and that they are from infancy raised in a kind of institutional environment. So they're messed up kids. They've actually done animal studies where when the animals are not allowed to have this attachment with their mothers, they die. Actually die. Okay. So now, to use that as an analogy, our real source. Now, you see, the example I gave was a kind of a chronological transformation or process, right? Because for 9 months you're in the womb, and then you leave the womb, but you need to have that sense of attachment external to the womb. So that's supplied by a nurturing mother. Okay, that's why. All right, I'll stop right there. So so we're not talking about chronological right now. You see, according to this Kabbalistic idea, let's leave for a second the image of being in existence internal to the divine mind. Let's use this model. Where are we? Really? We exist within the divine womb. I know that's
No, you're basically saying that it just things are turned around the opposite direction.
Okay, so hang on. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but hang on a second. So in a certain sense, the reality, the true reality, we can see it. If we had lens to see it, we don't. But if we had lens to see it, we actually are internal to the divine womb. Now, again, don't freak out anybody who's listening to this, right? I don't mean that God has a womb and that God is a woman and or any of these things. We all know that God is from Punjab, okay? And he's a male. That's a joke. Okay, so so what happens? We're ripped out of the womb, but we're not ripped out in the sense of, in a chronological sense, right? It's in a psychic sense. We don't experience our being in this nurturing womb, in this profound sense of attachment to our source, our mother. We are in many ways like an infant who's put into an institution, or these animals that are deprived of attachment to their mothers, they die. We experience a profound psychic pain as a result of our mere existence when we are not able to appreciate that we really are in the divine womb. In other words, mere existence is painful. I'm going to start to cry. I'm almost not exaggerating. Mere existence is painful. You ever notice this? Forget about people are sick and people are poor and people have relationship problems and people have to mow the lawn and whatever other crises there are in life. That's adding insult to injury. Mere existence is a profound source of deep psychic pain because we experience, an irrational person, as Mark said, will experience this sense of being ripped away from our source, from being in this protective, secure, nurturing womb, which is the divine womb, where we do live, but we don't sense it. And because we don't sense it, we suffer. We suffer. Now, when we experience a profound lack, in this case, lack of attachment, what do we naturally yearn for? Or put it this way, then we naturally yearn for the fulfillment of that lack. We sense this deep sense of detachment. We want attachment. We yearn for attachment. Now, there's a word for that. That's called dveikut.
Yeah,
that desire to cleave to God, to cling to God. You know, in modern Hebrew, devek is glue. That's called dveikut. Dveikut is not, a very pious Jew. And, he's out there working as a car mechanic. And then it's time to come into daven mincha. He's going to have to say the afternoon prayers. And so he sits down for a couple of minutes. And then he tries to inspire himself, since he's about to daven, to feel dveikut, this yearning for God. No, it's not some type of artificial imposition upon our kind of normal existence. What are we really saying about this yearning to be attached to our source? It's the most natural, the most deep-seated yearning, the most primal drive, even more for French fries. that we have as human beings. Now, I want to share something with you. Please do not think this is hokey. It's actually really profound. According to Kabbala, this is the source of, let's call it existential human suffering. Again, there's sickness and there's poverty and there's this and there's, right? Those are add-ons. But mere existence is painful. Well, what's the way to deal with that pain? The way to deal with that pain, if we're lacking X, what do we need? X. What if we were lacking X, but in some kind of misguided effort, we try to fulfill X with Y? We're all doing that. We're all driven on a very primal level to feel that sense of attachment, which is the real reality, but we live with this psychic sensibility of alienation, detachment, isolation, being cut off. And we're driven to repair that. But instead of creating attachment, we do something else. So I'm going to read for you a little sentence here. It's from a marvelous, marvelous book. Okay. It's a book by a certain Rabbi Taub. He is a specialist in drug addiction. Okay. Not one of my problems. But if it's your problem, it's my problem too. That's why I'm paid the big bucks. But they're all the same, whether it's drugs or anything else. I want to read to you, he's got this absolutely marvelous sentence in here. I'll read to you just a couple of sentences here. It's actually part of an anecdote. I don't know if he's a rabbi.
Yeah.
Happens to be a rabbi. So he describes he was asked to speak in a certain synagogue. Gave a talk. And it was kind of like, your typical kind of suburban synagogue, kind of middle class, whatever, professionals, whatever it was. He gave his talk. He didn't, sometimes those of you who sometimes speak in front of a group, sometimes you feel the click and sometimes, it's like, it's gatenished. It's not going. So he gives this talk.
He gave the talk and no one came.
Well, people came, but it just didn't.
No.
Yeah.
Mentally, they
Oh, very good. That was good. Sorry, I missed it. Yeah, that was good. It happened to be that down the hall was a meeting. And it was a meeting of alcoholics. The 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous. And if Mo keeps on trying, I'm going to end up being in that room. Not as the rabbi speaking, but as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, yes. You're spoiling me too much. It's getting dangerous. For those of you who don't know, he gives me a gift of the finest whiskeys, and it's I'm a one-day-a-week alcoholic, I guess. Is there such a thing? Maybe there is. In any case, so he gives this talk. Then he goes down the hall to a group of people that I'm willing, and he sort of expresses this in kind of a subtle way in the book, that the people in the sanctuary where he gave his talk could never imagine themselves being in that room over there, and maybe might not even associate with those people over there. he goes in there, he starts to talk, and he feels at home. And look what he says here. He says, he's quoting what he said to them. He said, our somethingness is not our true essence. Like the fact that we feel like we're something, right? Independent. Oneness is our true essence. The fact that we're profoundly attached to the divine womb, to use the metaphor. Not that it bothers all of us equally. Some people can live with it. For some reason, there are blessed people out there. I don't know, nothing seems to bother them. They never think about religion. They never think about spirituality. They never think about anything deep. They never think about meaning. Just money and sports. I don't know, whatever they think about. Okay? People like that in the world. I'm not sure if it's a blessing or a curse. In any case, people like that. Some people can live with it. Some people can't. But the people who can live with it are sitting down the hall in the other room, in the sanctuary. Those are the people who hunky-dory. While the people who can't are sitting right here. There's, in other words, people who often get involved in self-destructive behaviors. It's not because there's anything wrong with them in the sense of pathological. On the contrary, this is his claim. These are the people who, in fact, are most sensitive to the reality of being torn away from oneness. And that being torn away from oneness creates this, use a fancy word, existential anxiety and pain within them. And they are searching to repair that pain. Well, what's a good way of repairing the pain? L'chaim, anesthesia. And there's all kinds of anesthesia out there. You can drink alcohol. You can go to prostitutes. You can become a gambler. You can, whatever, you could become, every single thing. You could become a sports fanatic. Like fanatically devoted to, all a distraction. These are all distractions which, through usually pleasure centers,
or pain,
you forget the pain. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if there's even such a thing. That's something I'd have to think about. Like people who pursue pain because it kind of. I once talked with somebody who said almost those words. Larry, that's profound. You know the idea of cutting? There are people who cut themselves.
To feel connected. That
they're as an expression of to sort of escape the sense of the internal pain they're feeling. That in any case, I'll move away from that before it gets too heavy. Because it's pretty heavy here. But in any case, so now I want to share with you a marvelous quote here. Has anybody ever heard of, and I'm sure you have, Carl Gustav Jung?
Yeah, Jung. He was Jewish.
Right, he was not Jewish, as a matter of fact. No, he was not at all. He was actually I think his father was a minister, as a matter of fact. So Jung. So he was a kind of a disciple, student, colleague. Him and Freud had a parting of ways. There is an unbelievable letter. This is actually it's amazing. It's a typed letter. I mean, it's a photocopy, I guess, of a letter that Jung wrote to somebody. He talks about his attempt at curing alcoholics, Jung. And he talks about the failure of psychoanalysis. Surprise, surprise. to be able to help people with alcoholism in this particular case. It could be anything.
Yes.
So,
Your psychoanalysis.
so listen to this. He says something amazing. This was written in 1961. Okay. He's talking about actually a specific person here who actually ultimately left his alcoholism. You know, that is very rare. A person's alcoholic. That is no simple thing to leave that. So he's talking about a specific patient here. And he says in this the following. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. Carl Gustav Jung saying that he ultimately, it took him a long time, he ultimately came to the conclusion that, in fact, the craving for alcohol was a kind of misguided attempt at bridging the gap between his sense of profound alienation from the divine womb. To go back to our metaphor, Jung didn't say that, but to bridge that gap, that yearning for wholeness, yearning for oneness. And he quotes from Tehillim, from Psalms, as the heart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. Oh my gosh. As the heart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God.
Is that 42?
That is, yes, very good, Marguerite. That is Psalms 42. Okay. And let me read to you one more very clever concluding. It was very interesting, special, obviously. He says the following. He says, you see, I'm quoting, alcohol in Latin is spiritus. That's how you say it. That's what we say in English, spirits. Spiritus. And you use the same word for the highest religious experience, spirituality, as well as the most depraving poison, an alcoholic. The helpful formula, I'm quoting from Jung, is therefore is spiritus contra spiritum. That's Latin. So spiritus contra spiritum. So we have
the singular versus the plural.
Well, it's the alcohol spiritus contra against or parallel to spirituality.
Oh, okay.
That's what he's trying to say. He's just pointing. There's like an. It's like he's trying to point out like there's a. It happens to be a very clever, maybe not even just clever. Maybe there's something deep here linguistically. That what do spirits do for us? It's a substitute. It gives us a few minutes of a sense of leaving that existential pain. Not brought about necessarily because we didn't like our mother or our first grade teacher was mean or we ate too much peanut butter or whatever it may be. But the mere fact of existence is painful because the mere fact of existence is easily, almost as a default, as we've been saying, the sense of being ripped away from our cosmic source. Now, take a look at your sources, please. Okay, your source sheets. And so the second page, I distributed, there should be around here if anybody didn't get one. Okay. I want to read for you. This is from on the second page of the source sheet, where it says the continual prayer of the soul. It's the second source on the second page in this. Okay. In Hebrew, where it says Inyanei Tfilah, HaTfilah HaMatmedet Shel HaNeshama. Okay, now I'm going to read this in Hebrew. I actually found a lot of these translations on the internet, which is rare. I got kind of lucky, hit the jackpot. The only problem is, and I want to thank, as a matter of fact, Rabbi Eitan Ben David at yutorah.org for these much of these translations. But for my purposes, I'm not sure that translations here always do what I would like them to do. So let's read it in Hebrew. Mo, go ahead, please. That's a joke. Hatfilah hamatmedet shel haneshama. Now, I need some help from my Hebrew scholars out there. What's tefillah mean? Prayer. Matmedet comes from the word tamid. Always, continuous. The continuous prayer of the soul, mit ametzet hi tamid latzeit min el gilui, is continually striving to go from a state of concealment to the state of revelation. Let's talk about what he means. You know what Rav Kook is saying? Your soul is always praying. Hatfilah hamatmedet shel haneshama. The ongoing eternal prayer of the soul. And it's always davening, 24/7. But what does it want? It's desirous of its prayer to express itself not only on that hidden level, right? Unless you have a special kind of contraption that you can see that the soul is davening in there. It's concealed. You don't feel it always. But the soul is striving that its state of praying at every single moment be openly expressed. It wants to be able to express on the entire canvas upon all life forces of the spirit and soul. Just read this translation here. It wants to express its essence over all of the environment, over all the world, over all of life. Now, how does one express that prayer of the soul? In real life, in a state of revelation, where it's actually expressed outwardly through Torah, through divine wisdom. We'll explain this in a second. So it turns out that to worship God, you know what that really is? You could define the worship of God as the revealing outwardly of the ongoing prayer of the soul. The soul is always praying. And when we actually worship God, not just worship in prayer, but everything we do, which is sanctifying God's name, whether it's learning Torah, whether it's making a blessing before you have a cup of coffee, whether it's being compassionate, whether it's walking a blind person across the street, whether it's making an honest living, whatever it may be. Every single one of those acts, which we would in conventional terms call those mitzvot, following the commandments, Rav Kook says, you know what they really are? It's the outward expression of the ongoing davening of the soul. Okay, now let's just talk about what he means. This is one of the most famous, amazing, beautiful ideas of Rav Kook, that the soul is always davening. You know what he means by that? Remember, we just had quite a long conversation about what is our deepest yearning to restore on a level that we can actually live it, feel it, have some consciousness of it, the sense of attachment to the divine source of being, to feel really that we live in the divine womb. We are safe and nourished and secure because we live in the divine womb. That yearning, or to use the simple word, dveikut, dveikut, that desire to cling, or as Jung talked about it, right? The spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, the union with God, or as the psalmist, Tehillim, as the soul panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. That yearning, which is so deeply embedded in our soul, it's happening every single second. We don't always have consciousness of it, but it's happening every single second deeply within us. It's our most primal urge. You know what that is? Tefillah. That's davening. Davening is the yearning, the panting. My soul panteth after thee, O God. That's what davening is. That's what davening is.
That's what Kabbala is.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hold up that thought, because I'm going to start crying again. Hang on 1 second. So just hang on 1 second. Hang on 1 second, or else my brain, I'll forget what I'm going to say. That's what davening is. So if that's what davening is, the soul is in a constant state of davening. Right? That's what he means by that beautiful image. The soul is always davening. Okay. Now, Mark just said an extremely important thing that, again, it is tragic. So, as we'll see actually in the next source, kind of going ahead of ourselves to just relate to Mark's point. When we daven, we pray in the conventional sense, right? We hold up a prayer book and we say what's there. That is just one example of an externalized, formalistic, concrete expression of what's going on internally in our soul. So here's the problem, as Mark just said. When we pick up that prayer book and we just, hey, I gotta go to work. Why is this guy going so slow? Hey, turn the air conditioner. Turn off the air conditioner. Can you open the door over there? Ain't got any cleaning around here? Oh my God, this guy can't even pronounce the words properly. I'm out of here. I'm gonna go to the synagogue down the street. And this rabbi, what a monkey. Oh my God. Where'd he come from? And all the above. This
would never happen in our show.
Never. That's dveikut. That's an atrocity. That's an abomination. Yes.
Is it Hita Hapeshet? Am I saying it right?
We'll say that again.
I don't know. You read it when you're reading the Hebrew.
Lehit pashet, to spread out.
Well, that's the reflexive.
It is, because you're sort of causing yourself to.
It's interactive.
Yeah. Well, it's not interactive. It's you're causing yourself to expand outwards. It's the soul expanding outwards. Lehit pashet.
Which happens when you pray.
Yes. Right. It's the prayer of the soul. The soul is davening all the time. But now when you pray really with kavanah, with intent, with focus, with engagement.
And that would fill the hole that we alcoholics are trying to fill.
Oh my gosh. And Marguerite, God bless you. God bless you, Marguerite.
Emptiness because we can't fill the hole.
It's so painful to exist. because of our sense of being detached. When we pray,
That's
what
what I
a
was
healing
told.
experience if we pray with Kabbala,
Funny way to
where
say
that
it.
prayer can be a true expression of the neshama, which is praying all the time. Hatfila hamatmedet shel neshama, that ongoing and eternal prayer of the soul. So we just now touched on today, Baruch Hashem, what a beautiful, beautiful insight from Rav Kook. We've begun now in earnest the fundamental insight of Rav Kook into davening, using this doctrine of the constantly praying soul and what that means on a deeper level, why that is, and how that is the true response to our existential pain caused by detachment. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, with the help of God, we will then flesh this idea out more, different nuances, practical advice in our search to become more whole as Jews, as human beings, so that we can give healthy expression to that great, profound desire of our soul panting after God, as the deer pants after a stream of water. See you next week. Bye-bye.